I offer this to you in the name of our God, who is simply always present. Amen. Please be seated. Let's return to the book of Samuel. When Samuel asks Jesse, "Are all your sons here?" when he has been sent to find the one who will be anointed as king, he says that with sort of a tone of dismay. And Jesse returns the tone, saying, "Well, yes, there's the youngest, but. And we all know that the word but means that everything that comes after it is considered unimportant. But he's out in the field, but he's tending sheep, but he's young, but he's not engaged in society and work such as these brothers variously here are. He's a boy of the outdoors. How can that matter? But that's all he knows. He is naive. What can come of that? Well, there's an entire school of art, visual art, that is named the naive. And it doesn't mean that the artists don't have skill or training or education or intellectual capacity or analytical capacity of the world that is around them. It means that they choose to see the numinous nature of simplicity, to draw our gaze to the essentials, without which none of our accustomed sophistication could function at all. Some schools of art, of thought, of theology, indeed, thrive on detailed realism or abstraction, but the naive shines a light on simple values as a guiding principle, like, say, a post and beam barn, well-built, durable. A field, neatly sown. Cattle at a trough. Water in a well. Weather, just as it is, that day. All for their own sake. Good and worthy, no need of language or interpretation. Simplicity, strength, glory and clarity, the presence of God in the naive. I am reminded of a moment I heard of between an interviewer and Mother Teresa of Calcutta, I believe it was. And the interviewer asked her about prayer and how she does it. She said, "I kneel before God in silence for an hour." He said, "What do you say?" She said, "Nothing." He said, "What does God say?" She said, "Nothing." His eyebrows rose. This simplicity of silence as sufficient to the holy seemed naive, completely naive, and completely perfect. For she said, "And if you cannot understand that, I cannot explain it to you." And the numinous, naive, pure and simple, crystal clear to her. But the journalist, in all his sophistication, did not know what to make of it, any more than Jesse does not know what to make of it when Samuel's exclamation upon seeing David is, "This is the one who would be anointed to lead the nation." But doesn't he need some time to wise up? But Saul is still the king. Well, those things were indeed true. And he did have years to wise up, and there were years of military conquest and intrigue and the curlicues of conniving through the politics and the love affairs and the cruelty of his passions and power, as David did ascend to that crown, all that will happen later, Jesse sees, so why anoint him now? Is Samuel or God naive? So over time, it has been the stories of David, that military leader, and that passionate man, the lover, clever and cruel, the hero, the failure, and the king, that the romance of our biblical imagination holds closest. But at the same time, there has been all along a parallel literature, tales for the Sabbath day, rabbinic legends that are very, very old, that are told and told and told to tell the lifelong heart of David that always held the shepherd's heart of the naive. They're told and told to keep the character of David in balance, and therefore to keep our complicated selves in balance and in appreciation of the simple. So the legend is this. David was one of the greatest kings of Israel. We know that. But long before he became the king, he was a shepherd boy, and we know that. The prophet Samuel anointed him with a blessing and foretold that this young boy, son of Jesse the farmer, would one day rule over all the people. But in those days, the reigning king was Saul, and he was the great warrior that protected the people from the Philistines, as well as many other enemies. But he could also be very jealous and unreasoning. Sometimes he would fall into violent rages that would last for days, and nobody could placate him. But David was known as a singer and a player of the lyre and the harp. So he was brought before King Saul to serve as a court musician. And only David's melodies, pure and simple, could soothe the rages of Saul. David was also very brave, we know that. When he was very young, he faced down a lion, because he could, to save the sheep. When the Philistines attacked, it was David with just a sling and a rock that took down the great giant, Goliath. And through the land it happened that the people sang Saul's praises as king, but even louder, they sang the praises of David for his skills as a musician and a simply brave boy. So it was that David became known to the people all through King Saul's court. But despite all he had done for Saul, the jealous king could feel nothing but rage and threat from David, and he plotted to banish or kill him. One Sabbath afternoon, even though he knew danger was near, David was sitting in the palace garden. He knew danger was all about him, but he just could not believe it would come from one for whom he had done so much, such as Saul. And he sat there, letting his mind roam over more pleasant thoughts, when he noticed a little spider weaving a web. It was weaving the web between the branches of a flowering tree. And David had been raised in the faith of his people. He had believed that God had commanded that everyone should observe the Sabbath day, keep it holy, do no work. He believed that was always true, but he looked at the little spider, and a question came to mind. So he spoke to God in the silence and said, "O Holy One, you have created all of the world and chosen the people to follow your commandments. We have a role to play in our world, but what about this little spider? Here it works away all day on the Sabbath, spinning and weaving this web that nobody can use. It cannot be worn. It cannot be traded. It can't shade you from heat or protect you from cold. What is the point of this little creature and its creation? No answer came to David, but still, he did wonder. But just then there was a whistle by the wall. It was Jonathan, King Saul's son, who had come to warn David of his father's jealousy and that his father had gathered troops to come and capture and kill him. Quick, Jonathan said, you must flee at once. My father has sent soldiers to come and get you, and your life now is truly in danger. And without waiting an instant, David leapt over that wall and ran out into the wilderness, back out through the rocky paths, and sped away to find a place to hide. From all his days as a shepherd, he knew every stone and rock and path in every field. But the soldiers were close on his trail. As evening fell, David found his way to the hills of Judea, and he heard the baying of the dogs and the clatter of the footsteps and the weapons of the soldiers as they pursued him. And with no place else to hide, he remembered a small cave where he used to play when he was a child. And he ran into that cave, and he wiggled through that small opening all the way to the back until there was no space that remained, and he was there in the dark, crouched in the back, cold with fear, because he could hear the soldiers coming closer and closer, and there was no means of escape. And as the baying dogs grew louder, and the sound of the trumpets clamored across the hillside, young David thought all was lost. There was nowhere to hide, no tunnel or footpath to get out, and the barbed arrows of King Saul's guard coming closer and closer and closer. And just then, he saw a little spider at the mouth of the cave, weaving a web. This way and that, around and around. In silence, she worked quickly, weaving a web. So quickly, so quietly, there amidst all the threat that was coming before him, the silvery threads glistening in the moonlight as the soldiers grew closer and closer and closer. And just as they arrived at the mouth of that cave where the dogs had picked up his scent and were pressing in, they saw a spider web, complete with drips of dew, closed across the mouth of the cave. David in the back was trying to keep his heart from pounding, for he was sure that his heart could be heard, and he could see the muzzles of the baying hounds leaning towards the front of that cave, and someone holding at the straps, and one of the soldiers was about to break in when the other one said, "Stop. What are you doing? Can you not see? There's a spider web there on the mouth of that cave. There's no one inside there. No one has touched that for days, maybe weeks. The dogs have picked up a false scent. Let's find another way." And they went. And when they were gone and he could no longer hear the dogs or the clattering weapons or the sounds of the shouts or the trumpets of the soldiers, David came to the mouth of the cave and carefully, so carefully, undid the web, climbed out, set it back over the mouth of the cave again, and ran and found safety and shelter. And over time, years later, he did become a great king of intrigue and considerable capacity. But when he was king, every Friday night he would sit at the Sabbath table. He would say the blessings, light the candles. He would thank the Holy One for creating all the world. And as he would hold up the chalice and chant the prayers, he always gave a silent prayer for every living creature that walks or flies or creeps or crawls or swims in all creation. for they all had their place and purpose in what was holy, even the little gray spider. And so there, see, there is the sacred nature of the naive to hold in our hearts lifelong as a holy guiding principle.